We have the most over-medicated, sickest population in the world, and no one is talking about the root causes.
What's happening to the health of Americans? Did you know that the United States has the lowest life expectancy among large, wealthy countries, while far outspending them on health care? You know, you'd think that would just be the opposite. The fact is that we have the most over-medicated and sickest population in the world. Listen now as Robert Kennedy Jr. explains, at least in part, how this has happened in America.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children. And it's no coincidence that Americans die earlier than Canadians or Germans or Italians or Japanese or Koreans or Australians or most any other comparable country. And it wasn't always that way. Until the early 1990s, our life expectancy was the same or better than other developed countries. Then, suddenly, more and more Americans began suffering from chronic diseases, from obesity, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Our maternal mortality rate soared to the highest of any developed country on Earth. Same with infant mortality. Like the frog in the slowly boiling water, we didn't really notice as we got sicker and sicker. We've grown now to accept chronic disease conditions as normal. But now, in 2024, we're finally waking up to this cataclysm, and we're asking ourselves, how in the world did this happen? Well, a big part of it is our diet. Restaurants that serve contaminated food are fined or shut down. But when it's the government that approves the poisons in our food, a few people get very, very rich, and the toxins end up in every supermarket aisle. Let me show you what I mean. Doritos, Cheez-Its, Captain Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called atrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke or blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings. A century ago, it was just an obnoxious industrial byproduct that everybody was trying to figure out ways to get rid of. One of the ways that they did that was by paving roads. But then British chemists figured out that the coal tar could be used to derive fabric dye. And if fabric dye, why not food? Food manufacturers began using it to cover up the discoloration of low-quality foods that they wanted to pass off on unsuspecting customers. They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now. We've known this for decades. That's why tartrazine is heavily restricted in other countries. In some countries, foods with tartrazine have a warning label that it may cause ADHD in children. Today, it's made from petroleum, not coal tar. Either way, it's crazy to add this to your kids' favorite foods. It doesn't even change the flavor. This yellow dye isn't just in junk food. It's in the foods that we consider healthy. It's in everyday kids' snacks like popcorn, mac and cheese, fruit snacks. It's in sports drinks like Gatorade and so-called vitamin water. It's even added to chicken broth, to corn, to pickles, to mustard, and to yogurt. And so, of course, our kids get sick. And we lovingly feed them chewable vitamins which have, surprise, tartrazine. And so the cycle continues until the coughs and asthma kick in, at which point you go to pick up some cough syrup. And yeah, you guessed it, tartrazine. I've been picking on tartrazine today, but that's just one of at least 100 chemical poisons that our health agencies allow into our children's food. I can make a video just like this to talk about Red 40, BHA, BHD, potassium bromate, chemical after chemical, and on and on and on. If just one of them can cause all of these problems, imagine what they're doing in combination. That has never been studied. If we took all of these chemicals out, our nation would get healthier immediately. We'd have fewer sick days. We'd have better focus. We'd have less anxiety. Our kids would learn more easily. We'd lose weight. We'd have more energy. We'd have fewer tumors and longer lives. It's not all dark. Over the past 16 years, the government has banned 8 chemical additives that cause cancer, genetic damage, asthma, and many of the other health conditions, as tartracine does. And you know what's interesting? All 8 of those crucial steps forward in our kids' health were taken under President Trump. But the Democrats who claim to be all about health care have stood by watching other countries ban these poisons and make our kids sick, asthmatic, hyperactive, and depressed. They left them on every supermarket shelf in America. They even use your tax money to put them in your kids' school lunch. So their big food and their big ag donors probably gave them all that golden handshake and the big money hug. And their big pharma donors probably call them up and thank them also, because now they're going to make billions selling Adderall, Prozac, and rescue inhalers. Enough is enough.
He's right. Enough is enough. I couldn't have said it any better. I know we all thought the H and at least one of the 3-letter agencies stood for health. But when you begin to see what's being allowed in our foods and who benefits from an unhealthy America, it makes us ask the question, is America's health being sacrificed on the altar of corporate greed? You decide.
Thank you, Senator and Mr. Kennedy, for the honor to present here. I'm trained in gastrointestinal surgery. My group at Johns Hopkins does more pancreatic cancer surgery than any hospital in the United States. But at no point in the last 20 years has anyone stopped to ask, why has pancreatic cancer doubled over those 20 years? Who's working on that? Who's looking into it? We are so busy in our healthcare system, billing and coding and paying each other, and every stakeholder has their gigantic lobby in Washington, D.C., and everybody's making a lot of money, except for one stakeholder, the American citizen. They are financing this giant expensive healthcare system through their paycheck deduction for health insurance and the Medicare excise tax as we go down this path of billing and coding and medicating. And can we be real for a second? We have poisoned our food supply, engineered highly addictive chemicals that we put into our food. We spray it with pesticides that kill pests. What do you think they do to our gut lining and our microbiome? And then they come in sick. The GI tract is reacting. It's not an acute inflammatory storm. It's a low-grade chronic inflammation. And it makes people feel sick. And that inflammation permeates and drives so many of our chronic diseases that we didn't see half a century ago. Who's working on it? Who's looking into this? Who's talking about it? Our healthcare system is playing whack-a-mole on the back end, and we are not talking about the root causes of our chronic disease epidemic. We can't see the forest from the trees sometimes. We're so busy in these short visits, billing and coding. We've done a terrible thing to doctors. We've told them, put your head down, focus on billing and coding. We're going to measure you by your throughput, and good job. You did a nice job. We have all these numbers to show for it. Well, the country is getting sicker. We cannot keep going down this path. We have the most over-medicated, sickest population in the world, and no one is talking about the root causes. The Pima Indians are the perfect example. Here is a group where the obesity, diabetes rate was less than 1%. The land in New Mexico and Arizona had its river supply diverted by ranchers and settlers, and the land and the soil was destroyed. The government, recognizing this tremendous injustice, started to send free government food. But it wasn't organic kale and fruit and vegetables. It was processed and junk food. Instantly, the Pima Indians developed an obesity, diabetes rate of 90%. And what did the United States government do? What did our healthcare system do? The NIH dispatches its researchers to draw the blood of the Pima Indians to look for a gene that predisposes them to obesity and diabetes. What are our leaders doing? The H in NIH is supposed to stand for health. Or are they spending their money on food as medicine and looking at the estrogen-binding properties of pesticides that are driving our fertility rates down? They're funding research in Wuhan, China, and they're funding research on a new food compass to replace the misinformation they put out with the food pyramid, telling us Lucky Charms is healthier than steak. Somebody has got to speak up. Maybe we need to talk about school lunch programs, not just putting every kid on obesity drugs like Ozempic. Maybe we need to talk about treating diabetes with cooking classes, not just throwing insulin at everybody. Maybe we need to talk about environmental exposures that cause cancer, not just the chemo to treat it. We've got to talk about food as medicine and research these areas. 20% of our nation's kids are on medication. And as you heard, half are obese or overweight. Are they more disobedient than children in Japan? Or have we poisoned the food supply? Is this a chronic disease epidemic that has been a direct result of what adults have done to children? We like to blame people for their diseases, but maybe we need to look inward. We see all these shiny objects thrown at us. Politicians talk about, we've got a new healthcare proposal. Medicare can now negotiate the prices of 10 generic drugs. Don't be fooled. These are things in the periphery. It's not to say they don't have merits, but the proposed program savings in year one, by their own description, is $6 billion. In a $4.5 trillion economy that's expanding at 8% per year in the commercial sector, that's a $200 billion expansion. We save $6 billion. The best way to lower drug costs in the United States are to stop taking drugs we don't need.
Thank God some of these things are finally being addressed and changed by brave and caring people. You know, that's what love really does. But the opposite of love is just what you've heard and seen and is described in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 2 through 4, as it tells us that a sign of the very last days is that men would be lovers of themselves, they will be covetous, greedy, and high-minded. So I want to leave you with this thought. It's been said, you are what you eat, and certainly that is something that we should pay attention to. But the scriptures, God's word tells us that we are what we think. So as important as what we put in our bodies is, let's first and foremost fix our attention, our thoughts, and our beliefs on God's word, its promises, and its benefits. And as Proverbs chapter 4, verse 22 tells us, his word can be health and medicine to our whole bodies. The good news is that God is reminding us that real and lasting health is actually found from him and his word. And our belief and obedience to it actually spills over into our natural bodies. Above all, let's not forget this while paying attention to the other. Well, you know, I thank you for joining me today. If this has helped you, consider leaving a comment, actually a like, and sharing it with someone else. And until next time, I'm your host, Pastor Chris Morgan. I call you supernaturally blessed.